Hello, I'm Davina William and welcome to this week's program of Endzone Focus. An historic conference was held at Orakei Marae in Auckland earlier this year to evaluate the Rangatahi Court system, which enables young Maori offenders to be held accountable for their actions within a supportive cultural environment. The hui followed a Ministry of Justice report released last December on the early outcomes of Ngā Kuti Rangatahi, which began in 2008. Mania Clarke was at the hui.
Kia ora tātou. The wharenui here at Auckland's Orakei Marae is the venue that's been chosen as the place to evaluate Rangatahi Courts, or youth courts, described as breaking new ground in restorative justice. The purpose of Rangatahi Courts is to reconnect young offenders with their culture and their local community. And to do this successfully, each case requires the cooperation and dedication from many different organisations, including the Ministry of Justice, police, Maori and Pacific Islands youth advocates, kaumātua and Pacifica elders, as well as whānau. The hui was held over 2 days, and day one began with the pōwhiri for official welcome. Rangatahi Courts was first set up in Gisborne in 2008 and is partly modelled on Kori Courts, which is currently operating in Australia and allows Indigenous Australians to participate in their legal system. Kori elders or respected persons, the Kori court officer, Kori defendants and their whānau can contribute during court hearings. This is to ensure that sentencing orders are appropriate to the cultural needs of Kori offenders and helps them to address the issues relating to their offending behaviour. Principal Youth Court Judge Andrew Becroft says that Rangatahi Courts has been adapted to address Maori young offenders.
I guess we felt the advantage we have in New Zealand is an extant Maori community in local regions and parts of the country that are thriving and flourishing with Marae. It's maybe not an advantage shared in Australia. In Australia, the Kuri court model depended on people coming to the courthouse. We thought in New Zealand there were resources available, Marae in particular, which lent itself to the court process relocating itself and regrounding itself using a different cultural perspective. So we drew on the model, but it got adapted and I think quite significantly changed.
There are currently more young Maori aged between 14 and 16 per capita that are before the youth courts or in custody compared to any other ethnic group in New Zealand. Principal Youth Court Judge Andrew Becroft told me that for too long those statistics have been alarming and it was time for change.
Well, put very simply, anyone involved in youth justice will say you cannot be involved in our system without being confronted daily by the overrepresentation of Maori in our system. Of course, it's a feature of all our socio-economic indices, so it's not just limited to youth justice, but it is profound in youth justice. Overrepresentation rates are something like 400%. 20% of the population are under 18 are Maori, 50% of those apprehended are Maori, 55% of those in the youth court are Maori. Overall, nearly 80% in the Upper North Island of those young people in custody are Maori. So it's a crucial challenge for us all, and I guess many within the system sat back and said we must do something better. There must be a better way that we can deal with our rangatahi. Out of that concern was born the idea of Rangatahi Courts, where we take young Maori rangatahi back to their people, their tribal background, and we provide a culturally appropriate way of dealing with young people. This is not a revolutionary process. It's part of an evolutionary process, I think, in the way we deal with our young people. But that's really the history of it. It was born out of that profound frustration. Everyone in the system thought we must do better. There must be a better way. We must be able to deal with our Maori young men in particular in a more effective way, and the reoffending rates were just too great.
So what's the purpose of the hui and who have gathered here?
This hui is for everybody involved in our 10 Rangatahi courts and our 2 Pacifica courts. So it's for the practitioners. And it was a chance to reflect after 5 years in Gisborne, after a couple of years in other parts of the country, to reflect on our practice, to say how are we doing, how can we do better, particularly in the light of the research that's been carried out in respect of Rangatahi courts. What are the key lessons, how do we need to change, what are our next steps, where do we go in the future?
The Justice Department commissioned an early evaluation to be done. What were the findings?
The main findings, I guess, were twofold. In the context of it being a ringing endorsement for what was being done. In terms of young offenders and their families, it provided much more meaningful involvement, participation, connections. I've got to say, in a way that really shocked me, because there was real indirect criticism of what was going on in the youth court itself, which was seen as cold, foreboding, formal, non-participatory, lecturing, all the things that we thought the youth court wasn't and shouldn't be. Young rangatahi were telling us that's what it was like. So the messages about the Rangatahi court was that it was inclusive, it fostered participation, young people felt part of the process, their families felt part of the process. Fathers, who are almost a dying breed in the youth court, turn up in the Rangatahi courts.
Rangatahi courts consider that youth offending is related to a lack of self-esteem, a confused sense of self-identity, a strong sense of resentment, which in turn leads to anger, and ultimately to offending. It operates within our legal framework, but uses tikanga Māori and a marae as the venue. It's available to any young person who is before the youth courts and admit the charges they're facing, and want to have their family conference group plan monitored on the marae. This is to encourage meaningful whānau, hapu and iwi participation, with the desired outcome of reducing the risk of reoffending. We're here at Orakei Marae in Auckland at the Rangatahi Courts hui, and after the break we hear from leaders from the Maori and Pacific Island community and their reaction to this radical way of bringing youth to justice in their cultural environments. That's after the break. Welcome back to our special edition of End Zone Focus here at Orakei Marae in Auckland. Maori and Pacific Islands leaders have been meeting with officials from the Justice Department, police and youth organisations to evaluate the Te Kōti Rangatahi court system. Endorsements for Rangatahi courts has come from both Maori and Pacifica leaders, including Pa'u Irimia, who is a Pacifica elder within the Pacifica court system. He told me why he's supportive of this new cultural system of justice.
It is a good chance for the young person of the Pacifica got problem with the law, while they got chance to straight their life and back to the right track, so they can back to school, back to study, take the course, might be end up to the university for their future life. That is our main purpose of doing this for the Pacifica young people. We like this way because this is more chance to the young people talking to the judge. It's a sort of a conversation with the young person and the judge, and also us, to give them advice for their future. and also advise the parents, because the other thing is the parents, they care less about looking after their young people.
Yeah, well, we've found the concept of kaumātua and queer sitting with the judge and talking with the young person very effective, and the young people have commented on that. We've found the use of what are called lay advocates, statutory positions that we haven't used until Rangatahi Courts, very effective. They provide a family advocacy, a community voice, and that's come through loud and clear that they're providing very effective interventions. And we've also found that good tikanga programs, especially from, I guess, the jargon's a cognitive behavioural therapy background, working in the context of the marae can make some real lasting differences with young people and their family.
Grant Hawke is Rangatahi Courts kaumātua here at Orakei Marae and says the Kōti Rangatahi Court system is all about whānau.
It's about the family, and it's about the comfort zone of a lot of Māori families, that the mother and the father are very comfortable in doing the kōrero or supporting their tamariki or their rangatahi here in the marae setting. We have a week-long hui, and we sleep with them, we eat with them, we take them out to places like Muriwai to show them some of our further north boundaries, and if they are sort of whanaunga, we tell them where the whanaunga comes from. We go into the north, and it does change some attitude towards, because nobody's taken the time to take them into these areas. Some people who come from Te Arawa, they don't know that Rangi Toto, Hiriarangi, was named by Tamata Kāpu, you know. So a lot of historical things that are here for most Māori, whether you're from the south or whether you're from the north, this was the beginning, a lot of the beginning of those long voyages from Hawaii Nui.
So it's a good way to teach the young offenders their culture?
Yes, it's a good way, because if you see some of our whakairo up there, it expresses a lot of our interrelationship to a lot of those other tribal groups who are now in Rotorua, who are now in the Bay of Plenty, who are now up north. And so it does give us, those people that come here, you know, a look into the history of Tamaki Makaurau and themselves.
What have you seen as the reasons why our youth are getting themselves into trouble?
Well, that's one of the big questions worldwide of youth justice. What causes youth offending? If we knew what caused it, we'd have a very easy job. The best we can say is we know what the risk factors are. And for some young people, that's going to lead to offending. Mind you, for some it doesn't. But we know risk factors. The long-term risk factors are things like family violence, transient, poverty, teenage mothers are clearly a risk factor, but that's not to say all teenage mothers have kids who have poor life outcomes, but that's one of the risk factors. So is having parents or siblings in prison, early disengagement from education, early reliance on alcohol and drugs, particularly cannabis. They are sort of the classic risk factors. Get them all together, it's almost a perfect storm. But yet even some young people who have all those risk factors don't re-offend. So we can't say 1 + 1 = 2, these are the causes. But we know what the risk factors are, and all that we do really is working towards those risk factors in the context of home, school, good choice of friends, community connections. And where those things are strong, you don't see much youth offending.
And so I suppose I was going to go back to the whānau, and like you said, seeing that a case needs a whole wrap around the whole family. It's not just really the offender, it's a whole lot of home issues, intergenerational issues as well.
Absolutely. I mean, we have, I guess, pockets in New Zealand now of third generational underclass. That's a high risk factor too. But we know for absolute sure with our serious young offenders, we cannot work with them in isolation. And if we do, at some stage they have to go back to their own homes. The homes that really were the location of some of their key issues. So we know without a shadow of a doubt that the best responses to youth offending involves multi-system approaches, working with whole families, and they are the sorts of interventions that we know work best.
The government's still fully supportive of Rangatahi Courts?
Yeah, I think so. Bear in mind this was a low-key, under-the-radar judicial initiative, something that judges felt they could do by ordering case-by-case hearings of a young offender's case on a marae. Yeah, I think there's cautious optimism that we're on the right track. We need to respond to some of the real interest in other parts of the country for Rangatahi Courts, and I think we've got 10. It'd be great to think, as someone said in the hui, that within years we could have 50 Rangatahi Courts. Part of the deal at the moment is that we use Maori judges. We don't have an inexhaustible supply of Maori judges, so we're going to need to have, in an appropriate way, I hope, more Maori judges appointed, but that's not within my control, but I think it's a challenge that we're all aware of.
Do you have any concerns or reservations?
Sure, what we need to accept, it's not a magic bullet. It's not the winning solution of itself. It's the same legal process, the same legal foundation, but it's carried out in a fundamentally different way. But it's the same law, and we need to accept that unless there are programs that underpin, intervention programs that underpin the work of the Rangatahi Court, there's unlikely to be enduring change lives, rehabilitation. So I think one of the big messages out of the research and of this hui is that what goes on in the marae needs to be supported. It needs to be supported by quality intervention programs, community programs. Child, Youth and Family have been terrifically supportive. Education and health, those sorts of agencies need to wrap themselves round and bind themselves into this process as well, because the process itself, while it clearly is going to bring about more participation and respect for the court and the rule of law, those sorts of things, the program of itself isn't the magic bullet. It's the building block and it's the starting point. So I'm careful that we don't overhype what has been done. Mind you, I'm equally concerned that we don't undersell it. I mean, this is something significant. The kumara doesn't tell of its own sweetness, but nowhere in the world really are court systems going to another venue and working in that culturally appropriate venue to deal with some of our toughest offenders. So let's realise that there's something pretty significant going on, but let's also realise it's an evolutionary process. We've made the first step, many steps to go yet.
And do you see a change in the rangatahi once they learn about the culture?
I see a great change in them. You know, I see the proudness that comes out of them. They do that. They might come here, don't know how to waiata. Well, they know how to sing, but not Maori waiata. And they learn Maori waiata. They learn a couple of haka from their region. We teach them that, and they are real tuturu at the end of the. And when their parents come on the last day to hear them speak a little bit of reo, say their pepaha, part of their whakapapa, they are so proud to show off what they have done in a week.
So where to from here? You don't want it to be just a talk fest. What's going to happen after this hui?
Well, I can just pull out of my pocket by chance. We've got, I see, as a result of our discussion groups, we've got 34 ideas, one sentence ideas that I think we can fine tune what we're doing. We can go further. People have talked about a kaumata and queer guidance group nationally. We've talked about a national liaison and regional liaison officers that can work with Rangatahi Courts. This won't be a talk fest, you can be sure of that. There's too much energy here for us just to leave it at the wharanui door. We will be making some positive actions as a result of this hui.
And while we wait for a measured decrease in Māori and Pacifica youth reoffending, this hui has shown that there is a wharenui full of people who are committed to seeing the change in the lives of youth offenders for the better.
Ia
Mania Clarke brought us that story about the recent hui at Orakei Marae here in Auckland, which evaluated the Rangatahi Courts, which began back in 2008. There are currently 10 Rangatahi Courts throughout the North Island, as well as 2 Pacifica courts. And before we go, an update on an interview that we brought you at the beginning of May about the situation with Pastor Saeed Abedini, who's being held in Evin prison in Iran. When I spoke to his wife Nagme, she said that concerns were held for his health, which was deteriorating markedly after severe beatings, and the legal counsel Mania Clarke told me that international appeals were being made for the pastor's release. He made the point that Pastor Abedini had not violated Iran's laws.
He had complied in every measure with the law, and Iran's own constitution protects religious liberty and specifically Christianity as a religion. And in this particular situation, he had agreed to no longer work with house churches as an agreement he reached with the Iranian government, and they in turn agreed not to prosecute him for any work that he had done. And that was back in 2009. Yet, just as we saw late last year, he was arrested and imprisoned. Going back to those early 2000 years is what he was charged for. So they violated their own agreements. They violated their own laws. What we have been doing is raising Pastor Saeed's case here in the U.S., as he is a U.S. citizen, an Iranian American, and also internationally. It's important to note in these cases that it is international pressure, people standing up and condemning the persecution of one for merely because of their religious beliefs that really does have an impact in these cases.
And the latest news from Mania Clarke is that some family members have had recent contact with Pastor Abedini in Evin prison. He's out of solitary confinement, but concerns are still held for his health. International appeals for his release are still gaining momentum, and you can add your support on this website. That's www.savesaeed.org. That web address again is savesaeed.org. And that's our program for this week. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again next week. Ka kite, God bless you.